Hi, all you out there watching us either live or on the replay. We're so grateful that you've joined us. I'm Dave Williams, your host of the weekly Find Your New Normal talk show. And this season 3, those of you that have been following this know that we've expanded the reach beyond just coping with cancer to coping with crisis. As those of you know, I'm a colon cancer survivor and still coping with the complications of that disease. It's one of those few diseases that's part of your new normal, your new life. And it's something that you've got to adapt to. And because of that constant journey I've been on, I've met a lot of other cancer patients who have been on that recovery journey. And we've discovered that there's some message that we need that can come about by discussing this topic of finding peace when you're facing a crisis, whether or not it's a disease or a divorce or a disaster. There are so many crises in life, so many challenges that take us off balance, put us at a crossroads. And this weekly show on this season is going to spend a few weeks talking about what do you do when you're in that crisis and searching for peace. And to help me deal with that issue, we've got somewhere on the screen, we never know positioning because of the replay, but Sheila Schuster is here, my personal friend and guide, who has much to say every week. So hello, Sheila. Tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Dave. Well, I'm very happy to be here in our third show of the season.
That's right.
And I'm Sheila Schultz, and I have a business called A Quiet Mind. I'm a speaker and a coach and a facilitator. I do workshops and retreats all around stress management and adapting to change. So I've had some losses in my life that took me on this journey, and some interesting spiritual experiences that have really made me shift what I was doing 10 years ago. So Dave and I met online, and actually I met David online too, and we'll talk a little bit more about that because I can't exactly remember when we met David Bennett, but it all happened right sort of a few years after I began this change in my life.
Which was crisis focused as well. You're another example of a person who had a life, had a crisis, had a new life. You know,
right.
It's a fascinating thing. And Sheila and I are so pleased to bring a renowned celebrity to our midst. You know, we will embarrass him because he's a nice, kind gentleman. But I'm in awe because David has written so many books on this issue of finding peace and joy and understanding life through crisis, and has had a remarkable life journey right through to joining the community of cancer survivors. But his crisis had been at multiple points in his life, and he found a remarkable journey that was laid out, and he's been kind enough over 25, 26 years, I guess, something in that range. I mean, it was 26, I think, when you were drowned and decided that his journey and what he experienced was a near-death experience from a drowning that gave him a new perspective on what happens in life, and started writing, and has been on many television shows. The most recent was with Morgan Freeman on The Story of God, just to impress the pants off of me. That was an incredible show, and Dave's participation right on episode 1 set the tone of what it's all about. And so welcome, David. I'm so pleased you were able to join us and share a little bit about what's been happening to you.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Sheila. It's great being here with you guys. Well, I started out as an engineer. I was the chief engineer of the research vessel Aloha. I was also a commercial diver, so quite the adrenaline junkie. But then I had that near-death experience, like Dave, like you said, and it changed me, and I felt like I needed to be more of service, and I quit my life at sea. I quit all that exciting exploring the oceans and stuff that was actually my dream job, but I quit that in order to to pursue a life of service. And I transitioned and became the assistant director of dialysis programs in a hospital in central New York, and worked there trying to, give back in some form and in some way. But then I had another near-death experience, and then I had cancer. And the interesting thing is each experience built on the next and gave me the tools I needed to survive the next challenge. Maybe that's something we could talk about a little bit. But eventually, the cancer itself was so debilitating for me that I ended up becoming retired. I'm a happily retired guy now, but I fill my time with my real passion of being a transformational life coach. I help people, other cancer survivors, and people that have had spiritually transformative experiences. And another one of my passions is I do a form of energy healing work that is, I call it white light energy work, because it's what was given to me in my near-death experience, and it's what helped me to overcome my cancer so that I was cancer-free within 6 months. So that's kind of where I'm at these days, and it's fun because I'm at a place right now where, yes, I'm a disabled American veteran, all that stuff, but I'm at a place where I can just allow life to unfold. I don't have to plan anymore. So I'm past that stage in life where we're at a point of survival and getting through these crises. I mean, we all have crisis. We all have stress in our life, but it's so removed in my consciousness and in my being and the way that I live my life that when an obstacle presents itself in my life, I no longer think of it as challenging so much as just there's an obstacle that, let's work on it and see what we can do to get past it,
I love how you talk about that. Oh, go ahead, Dave.
No, go right ahead. Jump in.
I love that description because that's exactly the way it feels. And when I started talking to people about this, it's like life is so much more effortless than it used to be. And then I realized that I was the one making it difficult because I would look at a situation in a very different way. So that's one of the things I work on with clients is sort of opening your perspective a little bit and seeing that there's so many different ways to look at the same situation and that we are in charge of either limiting or expanding our view and giving ourselves the help that we need to come up with solutions. So this becomes really sort of a game. This really is sort of playful. This is that life is just not difficult. And it used to be for me. I was that person who would sit up all night long worrying about silly things, just things that I could not get my mind off of, sort of having an addiction to my thoughts and being really tight and wrapped up in my thoughts. And after the series of losses that happened to me and an experience with my dying father, everything became light. Everything became easier, and it was easier to smile, and it was easier to move through challenges. They just don't feel like challenges anymore. They really are kind of opportunities. Oh, this is happening. Huh. I wonder what's going to happen next. Oh, now this is happening. So it's a very different way of experiencing life.
And that is probably where our focus of this season is about, is how do you experience life either during or after that recognition you're in a crisis? Because in the moment of crisis, whether it's a disease or disaster or divorce, whatever, you become lost. You become alienated from your world. You become almost in a high anxiety panic situation where the old noggin isn't processing the way you wish it could, and you tend to feel alone and unsupported and are trying to reach out to get answers to the big question. Why is this happening to me? And, what should I do with this? And, in some cases, and the people that I've talked to, they've tended to say, I'm at a crossroads and I have to make some decisions about where do I go for these answers to the questions that seem to be running through my mind. Some of us have a religious background that says, I get comfort through prayer and my religious structure. Others don't have that formal structure and live in this new mainstream world of spirituality that gives them a different construct to say, am I alone or am I connected? Is there a creator? Are there things such as angels that I can be part of? Is there even a life after death? If this crisis goes sour and this is the end, what does that really mean? What's the next stage? So in that crisis, we have all of this tumultuous thought process going on that we try to sort out. And then as we get out of that and start to recover, based on how we coped with that crisis, we're going to have a different way of looking at life. We've either learned from that crisis and grabbed new values and new attitudes that we can now move forward, or we haven't learned. And I've met many people in crisis that have just packed it up, put it under the bed and said, that's it, I'm not going there until it happens again. David, in your example, I mean, I can't imagine, like yourself, I was not a commercial diver, a recreational diver, and I understand the joy of open water and what it's like to dive, and always wondered what it would like to drown, and you experienced that, and yet it wasn't drowning. It's called nowadays a near-death experience, and a lot of people don't understand what that term is. I mean, we've watched the Hollywood movies of what is a near-death experience, but that isn't necessarily what actually happened. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what started to handle your crisis and move you forward.
Yeah, mine happened, in 1983. It was quite a while ago, but yes, I drowned. But the neat thing about, and near-death experiences, Hollywood has this portrayal of, going through the tunnel of the light and, and meeting, all those deceased loved ones and stuff like that. And that's really cool. And that happens for a lot of people. But it's not necessarily the only truth. Near-death experiences are really profound psychological events that transcend and many times have these mystical elements. As far as when you're thinking of being, living here in this physical realm, you transcend this physical realm into this expansive consciousness that, and the primary element that most experiencers feel is this sense of belonging, of being loved, of a sense of peace. And that's the foundation of a lot of these experiences. And you don't have to, and another myth is, that you have to die and to experience this. And that's not true. You don't have to die. NDEs are really a small part of a larger family of experiences. And a lot of times we call them spiritually transformative experiences because there's a spiritual element to a lot of these experiences. And in a spiritually transformative experience, when you come back, you're still the same person. The only thing is you've just experienced this phenomenal experience that you can't explain, you don't have a vocabulary for, and all of a sudden, and that starts creating these challenges in your life, because now how do you live with this beautiful experience, sometimes beautiful, and then there's about 12 to 18% of experiences are called disturbing experiences. They're, so I mean, and then how do you deal? And you don't hear too much about the less than beautiful experiences because, people like, oh, wow, I didn't have a great experience. And so they're underreported. They tend to be underreported because people, when we come back from this, I thought I was nuts. I thought, what was that? I was an engineer, and I saw things in black and white, and suddenly I'd been thrust in this world of multicolor, and I didn't know how to deal with it. And in fact, I kind of wanted my old life back. I didn't want that knowing. I didn't want that understanding. I was starting to see auras at the time. I didn't even know what they were. I called them life force energies because as an engineer, I had to put a name on it of some sort, But I was trying to deal with this overwhelming influx of new data. There was like I had suddenly transitioned into a new paradigm. And I had a new worldview. I hadn't even developed a new worldview yet. I was just on the threshold of a new worldview, because these experiences, once you have them, they don't go away. I can recall my experience as clearly today as I did the day of the experience, because you enter a realm of hyper-reality where it's more real than this life. To me, this life actually feels more dreamlike than the experience. The experience itself felt so much more expansive. There was so much more liberation because I was outside my body. I didn't have the physical confines of this physical body. And so you come back and then you're back in this dense, heavy body. You don't have that expansive knowing that you had while you were in the light. You're trying to remember everything that you were told while you were there or experienced or whatever, and you have to, do you reach out to somebody? This is where the challenges come in. Who do you reach out to? Who's going to be your confidant that you first tell? And if that confidant is negative, doesn't give you a positive response, how do you deal with that? Another challenge. Oh my gosh. And so these challenges we don't realize. And then sometimes these experiences give us these gifts. Sometimes to me, it felt like a curse at first. Like when I first came back, when I looked in somebody's eyes, I could see their spirit. I could see who they really were. And it felt so incredibly invasive to me. It felt like, and I didn't know how to turn it on or turn it off at first. I had to learn how to do that, and but it felt like if I so I couldn't look at anybody in the eyes. And I was this macho diver Dave guy who, I looked everybody in the eye, and I told Dave and Sheila my early philosophy was you cut your swath through life, and so, this was who I was before the experience, and now I have all of this new understanding, and it feels invasive to look somebody in the eye because I can see deep into their being. So, how do you do with all that, and so it takes time. It takes time after one of these types of challenges to start to integrate the experience. And funny thing is there's a bunch of brain science out there. We're studying the brain left and right these days, and we're starting to develop. We know how memories are developed through the synapses and things like that, and that we have to, when we develop new memories, it's kind of like a drawer system or a file system. The synapses are kind of like a file system where when we develop new synapses, we can put memories in there and we can hold them. And then the more that we utilize those memories, the more they kind of move up in order of what priority, in our brain and that sort of thing. But when you have an experience like this that is so overwhelming, there's no place for the memory. The brain doesn't have the capacity to recall the entire memory all at once. So when you first come back, you're questioning all of this because it's like, what was that? All of that. But you have this recall, but it hasn't gotten drawers yet built to be able to put into. And so they figure it takes 7 to 14 years actually for your brain to fully develop the capacity it needs to come to an understanding of what all of that was. And that's that integration process when we go through something traumatic like that. And it's fascinating. I find that I'm an engineer. I'm still an engineer at heart. Although I've integrated a little bit, I'm not so much black and white anymore. I like to.
You're a little woo-woo.
Yeah, I guess, anyway.
I know some of our audience is sitting there right now saying, what in the world is he talking about?
Yeah, well, woo-woo is the sound a train makes when it goes by.
That's true.
So.
Well, that's right. That's a good sound to a lot of people. It's not
yeah, exactly.
The scary woo-woo of Halloween night, which
that's right. Yeah,
we're on a different plane. But it is something that, people will challenge. And certainly, when I started thinking about this season and did my research over the spring and the summer, I was surprised at this concept of near-death experience. I was thinking, okay, so there's a few dozen people who've had it. But there are millions of people who have this. I mean, I think the latest was like 22, 23 million people, have had.
Just in the United States.
Yeah.
That's just in the United States, that number. And also there was in 2012, there was a Pew research that looked at the greater picture of spiritually transformative experiences. And the Pew Research Foundation is huge. I mean, they're well respected globally. And they found that in adult Americans, that it was 57.6% of the population have had some form of spiritually transformative experience. The interesting thing is, so this is science. I mean, this is, not science, this is research. And so, okay, so more than half of the adult population in America have had some form of spiritually transformative experience. But yet we don't talk about it. There's no infrastructure out there to deal with it, to help people integrate these experiences. And a lot of times when people have these experiences and they go to their clergy, they go to their healthcare professionals, they go to, whoever is going to be their first responder, many times the responders don't have any support systems in order to help the experiencer. So it's this this phenomena that is underground. It's almost like it's just ready to percolate up through the surface, and it's starting to. You're starting to see more shows based on people having these experiences and how it affects them and things like that. That's kind of what Morgan Freeman was trying to portray in that new series. I'm kind of excited because I just heard a friend of mine is going to be on season 2, so there is going to be a season 2.
That's great.
Yeah, I'm kind of happy to hear about that. So there's shows and there's things out there, media. Of course, we have social media now, so people can connect with other experiencers, which is a huge resource that wasn't available when I had my experience, or Sheila, when you had yours either. I don't know there was,
right.
It was hard to find people talking about it, back even 10, 15 years ago, yet alone 30 years ago.
I can't even imagine. Really?
Yeah. There were books out. Dr. Raymond Moody wrote a book in 1975, Life After Life, that, was kind of a pioneering type of thing. IANS was the International Association for Near-Death Studies, which is a research group that started studying NDEs, happened around the same time. And in fact, Dr. Moody and Kenneth Ring and a number of other really well-respected psychologists were part of the founding fathers of IANS, and they've done a lot of research into it. But to this date, there's no real explanation, what an NDE is. We can tell you what it isn't. We can tell you that it isn't a part of the dying brain syndrome that we know affects people. We do know that there is a dying brain syndrome, and we know that it's not hypoxia, lack of oxygen to the brain, but there are some similar traits there. And I could tell firsthand because I experienced in drowning, that sense of loss of oxygen, and we're trained as divers.
As a driver to experience what that is.
Yes, we're trained in commercial diving. We're trained, to they don't take us to death, but they take us to that point of oxygen deprivation where we feel the euphoria that you feel, just before you die. And in fact, that when I had my experience, I went past that point, and I breathed in the salt water. I drowned, and I was still curious, like, what the heck is going on? You know, I recognized the euphoria while I was having it and everything, but it just, I just went so far past it. But, you know, I mean, so these are things that, you know, research and science can tell us, but it doesn't really help the experiencer in that integration. So, and I found with dealing with cancer, you've got even more because there's a lot of similarities when you're given a prognosis. There's a lot of things that will bring on a near-death or near-death-like type of scenario. Cancer can create a lot of very similar after effects that experiencers go through. Like when you're given the prognosis, you go into this state of fog at first while the doctor's telling you all these things, and you have to kind of like get a grasp on it. But then all of a sudden you kind of pop out of that into this sense of clarity, you know. And what is that clarity? Where does that come from? And the more you start to explore that clarity, you understand what's important in life. You have a good grasp on what needs to be. Now, I'm not going to say all cancer patients go through this, because some cancer patients really just get stuck in denial right off the bat. Mm-hmm. But many who move through the stages of grief that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross described, and when they finally get to that state of acceptance, this is where they reach that sense of clarity and understanding. And those are natural stages. I mean, Elizabeth was a pioneer in showing us how grief and prognosis like that are, you know, affect us. And it's natural. And most healthcare professionals are schooled in that. They understand that. Right. But they don't understand when somebody has a near-death experience or a profound spiritually transformative experience, and they come back and they've gone through all those steps, like boom, 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 and they're immediately in acceptance, but the healthcare people still think they're in denial, you know. So right. So it's kind of it creates another dilemma sometimes for experiencers.
You know, and I could see that because, you know, I certainly didn't have a near-death experience, but my situation was that my father was dying and he had a congestive heart failure. I was spending the night in the hospital with him, and he was having difficulty breathing. I haven't talked about this in so long because I don't know why. I you know, in the very beginning when it happened, I was talking about it a lot, and to more and more as friends would ask me about it. But all of a sudden I thought, you know what, that's kind of like a story, and I don't want to get caught up in the story. But, you know, Dave, some of the things you brought up just brought this so gushing back into into today. Like you just said, it's still so vibrant in my mind. But I think what happened to me is there was a tremendous sense of peace that came out of my experience. And I did disappear. I mean, I felt like I was no longer a physical form. I felt like I was the space around things. There was a tremendous connection. It was bigger than me, my father, bigger than humans. It was just this tremendous, powerful, and, you know, you could just say love, feeling, light, something. That made everything very clear that I can't describe to you. And for me, I could see how frustrating it would be as a cancer patient to have this feeling of complete peace, knowing everything is just okay and just fine, and having the healthcare community question you like, well, what happened? Are you, you know, you're still sick. You still have the cancer in you. You're not accepting this. And I can only imagine what it's like for someone who has gone through this and has to deal with the process of healing physically and dealing with the skepticism from the outside. I don't know, Dave Williams, what you thought about I know you had some situations similar to that where you were questioning things, you were kind of turning a corner, and I know that your healthcare professionals were questioning you.
Oh, I mean, they don't understand what's really going on with the patient recovery process or even management process while in the treatment program. And this sense of loneliness and needing support beyond that which you get from your immediate family members who you assume will love you and deal with you. But there's a reaching out, particularly in a life crisis situation where you're asking yourself, am I going to face death? Then that whole issue of, well, what does death mean? Generally in our lives, we haven't approached that question. You know, we might have talked about it in our religious practices, but you don't really spend a lot of time thinking about what is death and what is the afterlife and what does that mean and is there a God and what does a God do with me? And suddenly in this health issue, when you're told you might not survive, then that it gets involved with how am I going to heal? So if you're one of those people who have a spiritually transformative event where now miraculously the doors get open and you make physical contact with, you know, as David says in his book, your soul family, then suddenly you haven't thought about that. I mean, if I had a near-death experience today, I'd be saying, soul family, who are these people? What are these beings? Why are they there? What are they? I'm dying here. What's happening? And yet, once you've gone through it, and in Dave's case, he's had a couple of occasions where he's met his soul family, even done past life regression and taken a look at his soul family in other lives. You know, people can look at this as, oh, this is all weird. It's all crazy. I don't really care. The point we're trying to make this afternoon is it doesn't really matter to say it's true or not true. What is true is there was a David before NDE and there's a David after NDE, and they're different people. And the way he coped with his crisis, whether it was drowning or, you know, stage 4 crisis where he was given another death mandate, he was able to deal with it in the here and now. He was living in the present moment, which is what our show was all about. You can do this. As I was saying at the beginning, you get into this panic, confusion where you're all over the place, worrying about the past, concerned about the future. How can I get into getting some peace today? The process that David's talking to us about tells us, wait a minute, if we want to explore that area, maybe that's extra information to help you deal with the crisis. And that's certainly what I've been doing, is trying to say, you're going to have a life full of crisis. And what are the new skills that I can learn? And by listening to someone and not making a judgment, this is crazy stuff, woo-woo stuff, I don't care about stuff. Instead, just say, for him, it's real. Don't judge it. Listen to what he has experienced and how it has changed his life. Now, can I use that in any shape or form for today's crisis or one that I might face in the future? To me, that's the power of I'm here now, what? Because I need to be in the moment, and all these people who've had incredible experiences should be listened to. And they're, you know, it's odd for the black and white guy to say, take a look at this stuff, but there's a message here that can really help you. And just to show you how pronounced it was, David, describe how someone would have described you before your transformative event, and now having accepted what you call gifts as a result of that. What kind of person are you now? What was the transformation of David Bennett?
Yeah, I think before I was an engineer. I pretty much saw things in black and white, but I was also an adrenaline junkie. I liked the thrill. I liked to try to, you know, push the envelope and live life on the edge. I had a philosophy of you cutting your swath through life to survive. I was a survivalist in a lot of ways. Not that I was storing food or anything like that, but I felt that in order to get what you needed and to survive in life, you need to push your way through, because nobody was going to give it to you. Nobody's going to hand it to you. So I had this very self-involved persona that I took on. And And it's kind of interesting, when you have the experience, then all of a sudden, it's like any in life, we start down these paths and we face these forks in the road a lot of times. And whether it's a healthcare crisis, whether it's a near-death experience, whatever it is, you suddenly feel naked and alone. And you're, because we have this false perception that we are separate individuals, and that's an illusion that we all live under, that, okay, I'm this separate individual and I'm trying to survive in this life, in this hectic, chaotic world that we live in. And, and I'm going to shield myself and I'm going to protect myself. Well, after my near-death experience, I faced another huge fork in the road, but this time I felt that naked and alone, but instead of putting on something to protect myself, I felt like I just throw that off. It doesn't feel comfortable anymore. So now I feel like I've transitioned a little bit, and then, and that doesn't happen instantaneously. That's part of that integration that I was talking about. But it helped me to find, by opening up and start listening, because then everything was through my mind. I focused everything through my mind. After my near-death experience, I learned to listen to my heart. I didn't disregard the mind. In fact, what I found through living life is that there needs to be a balance between a synergy between the two, a coherence of mind and heart. And you need to kind of bring that together, and that's where your focus comes from. So, and again, I'm getting into the woo-woo parts again. Sorry, but I try to live my life now with a little more heart or loving type intention, using loving intention as my primary focus.
But that came after years of integration. I mean, at the
beginning, that didn't come right away.
It was really just of tolerance, acceptance, and truth. I mean, those were the big things that you suddenly woke up and said, whoa, something just changed in my life.
Well, and the acceptance, tolerance, and truth, that was my mantra the first 11 years after my experience, because I didn't have anybody to share it with. I was isolated, living on board a ship, and back in the early 80s, underwater exploration was considered extremely dangerous, and we put each other's lives in each other's hands every day. It was just a part of life for us. And so talking about death was really taboo. You couldn't share that type of information. So I had to I had to kind of wall that new perception, that new world view of mine off from everybody else. And so I kind of self-isolated myself, even amongst all my shipmates and these guys that, that I trusted with my life. But I could accept that in that experience, especially that life review that I had a very profound life review where I saw who I truly was. And with that, I could accept, this is who I am. I've got a long ways to go, but this is who I am right here, right now. And I can work on myself. I can make myself a better person. But then also tolerance. Like I said, I used to have that philosophy of cut your swath through life. Well, now I had this new tolerance of where I was in life situations, the people that crossed my paths. Before, if somebody came into my life and they didn't share the same philosophy I had, or if they weren't looking in the same direction I was going, then they had very little significance in my life. I would walk right past them, through them, over them. It didn't matter. But now, suddenly after this experience, I saw how the interactions that we have with each other in life are so important. Because in my life review, I got to see how every interaction, we affect each other, and through every interaction. And so I suddenly developed this sense of tolerance, because I may cross paths with people that I don't agree with their choices or where they are in life. But it doesn't mean that, I don't have to own their stuff. It's their stuff. It's their life. God bless. And and I can be tolerant that that's their path. You know, they've got their own road to hoe, and but I still have my life to live. And so I became more tolerant of other people and their paths, their life's choices. And then truth. And this is a big one for me because, again, I was an engineer and I saw things as black and white. But truth, suddenly, I understood we all have our own personal truth. And this personal truth resonates. And this is how I began to develop this focus of living heart-centered, was because I recognized that when I was experiencing a personal truth, that it resonated in my being. And it was like, wow, you know, so all three of us can can go through something. We'd be riding in a car and have an experience. Each and every one of us is going to develop our own personal truth of that experience. So it's not that any of the truths aren't true. It's just they have this subjective feature that is personal for each and every one of us. So, you know, we're all going to have this physical view because we're living a physical life, and we have to then, you know, live with that. But a lot of times we ignore that for the black and white types of truths because that we used to consider that a higher truth. But it's actually flip-flopped. Our personal truth is the higher truth that we need to be living and experiencing and projecting in our life. And once we flip that around and we start living from our personal truth, that's when people start to recognize there's something about you. I can't put my finger on it, but there's something about you that I can trust because you're living within your truth. And they can actually respect that. They may not, and a lot of times we don't understand it, but there's some people that have, I don't know, a sense about them when you're in their physical presence. One of my biggest mentors, she was a near-death experiencer. Her name was Margaret Keene, and Margaret's no longer with us, but when you were in her presence, you felt totally loved. Totally loved. I mean, it felt like, wow, I was stepping back into the experience because the love that came off of this woman, and she was this old white-haired lady, you know, but you just felt loved in her presence. And I asked Margaret one time, I was at her house, and I said, Margaret, you know, I said, you know, one of my ideals in life is to be like you, to be able to just live 100% of my life being love. And she just laughed at me. She laughed at me. That is the craziest thing I ever heard. She goes, I get just as frustrated as the next guy. This is, you know, that's an unrealistic ideal to be 100% love because we're human. We live in this physical form. But, you know, but it's still an ideal that you can reach for. An ideal is not necessarily something you can attain, but an ideal is a goal that you can work toward, you know, and you recognize it that way. So what Margaret was to me, she's my ideal because still, even her worst day, she's 90% love, okay, you know, on her worst day. Me, I'm nowhere near that yet, you know, but that's my ideal, and I can work toward that. I can maintain that inner peace within myself. You know, I mean, let's all try to strive for that inner peace. I mean, that's a goal. That's an ideal right there. You know, if I can maintain that inner peace within myself and just move forward and be present in every moment so that I can be the best person I possibly can be, you know, because that way you're projecting your future right there. I don't need to plan my future anymore because I'm trying to be as good as I can be in this moment and the next. And in that way, I know I'm building the brightest possible future I can possibly build.
And, you know, that kind of life philosophy is so important, but so difficult because things that we're not taught that. And that's what I love about what we've been talking about this season is introducing some new concepts for all of us to think about. I mean, you heard David mention this concept of the life review, and some of you probably jumped and said, "Oh, that happens when you're dead." I mean, the angels come and they judge you, and based on what you did in living a good life or a bad life, you're now going to go to heaven or you're going to go to hell. And so he's, okay, I get that, but no, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about not a question of judging your life, but reviewing the impact of your actions during your life, both positive and negative. And if we did that every day, not waiting for a near-death experience for the formal peer review or life review, but rather just recognizing that everything we do has a ripple effect, positive or negative, to everybody else. And
if I could just make one quick correction there. In the life review, there is no positive or negative.
That's right. It
just is.
It just is.
It just is. It's just in the life review, it's not so much judgment. We bring our own judgment.
That's you judge some of the things that you saw as having.
You have seen and you have lived.
Wish I hadn't done that. I feel guilty about that. Boy, look at the impact of this. I feel good about that. It's you making that analysis of what have I been doing. Why wait for the crisis? Do that every day. You know, as we talked last week, you know, my process is a daily review. What happened during the day? What am I grateful for? Why am I grateful for it? What was the impact of the things that I did or didn't do? How am I going to do the next day? I've been trying to figure out a new way to live my life as if I have what you went through. And I find that gives me a sense of confidence, a sense of peace, a sense of joy, and a sense of gratitude and the desire to continue to live, which you don't feel when you're in the moment of crisis. I just want to die, crawl up in a ball and take it all away. And now you suddenly learn that, no, if you can change the way you're living in the current moment, then you're going to find that peace that you've been searching for. But not instantly. I mean, it takes a long time, but it can happen.
It takes discipline.
It does.
It takes discipline, Dave. That tool of reviewing your life is excellent because that's the first step towards mindfulness. Because to develop a life of mindfulness, you have to develop a discipline. And that having a daily review where you don't judge yourself, but you look at, you know, what happened today? Well, I could have dealt with that better or whatever, but the next time something similar happens, you're going to recognize it sooner, and you're going to, you're going to go into that present moment of reviewing. Oh, look at where I am right here, right now. Wow, I've experienced this before. You're in a present moment review. You know, you've risen above the circumstances, which is a huge step. And so by practicing that daily review, you start to bring that review process into your life on a more moment to moment. And as you do that, you're developing mindfulness. You're developing a more systematic way of living life mindfully, but then also you're doing at the same time when you're being mindful, you're elevating yourself above the circumstances and becoming more of an observer. And in that observer state, you're more empowered because you have a clarity of vision that you don't have when you're all wrapped up in the drama and the circumstances of a situation. And we're talking about all of life situations, whether it's family, work, play. Circumstances surround all of our life's activities. But a lot of times we allow the circumstances to run the life and not our higher mind or our mindfulness state, where we rise above. And and when we can rise above, and this is where I try to teach people when I'm coaching transformational coaching, I try to get to that place where we elevate ourselves above the circumstances. And now let's look at where we are, what is it that we desire, and develop some healthy ideals that help us to thrive and move forward. But what you were talking about, that review, that is an excellent tool to start the process, and don't give up. A lot of times it's hard, every time I start something new in life, oh God, something else, I don't have the time, oh my gosh, moan. But if you cut that time out, I mean, God, you can do it in the shower in the morning. You can do it while you're sitting on the potty. I mean, there's times in life where we can throw that in, and it doesn't really have to take up. And instead of worrying about the future or fretting about the past, if you spent a few moments examining and reviewing without judgment, oh my gosh, you'd be so much further along. You're not trapped in the past or caged by future expectations. You're living more in a present moment, and living more mindfully.
One of the things that you said in the book is that you don't have to wait for a near-death experience, that if you happen to get in the mindset that this other multidimensional universe exists, you can go and visit it when you want. In fact, there are some philosophers like Swedenborg who spent years visiting the afterlife and chronicled it, journaled it, and explored it. Well, you, in your own life experience, voluntarily jumped back into the light. I think it was with Margaret who showed you how you could go back there. And
scared the heck out of me the first time.
I guess so.
Yeah, you know what? Jung used to do that too. I mean, he had a very rich life exploring the altered states as well. And I mean, look at. I mean, he taught us all about archetypes and things like that. And where did he learn all of that? I mean, he had a near-death experience, but he also spent time, and he didn't really release that information till his family actually released the information after his death in the Red Book. And it's a fascinating read if you ever want to see where Jung got a lot of his philosophies from. But yeah, I mean, you do not have to die to have that ability. It's a matter of, and it sounds so simple when I say it. And it sounds so simple and yet so complicated at the same time. It's a matter of allowing.
Right.
Just simply allowing. We create so many barriers in our life. I can't do this. I can't do that. But there are moments. A simple way I like to help people try to see that they actually have done this in the past is by finding a moment of clarity in their life. And then explore that clarity. Where did that come from?
Right.
How about, do you like to be creative? When you're creative, you use your inspiration. Where does that come from? Where does that inspiration come from? It comes from your divine essence. I mean, that's where all that clarity, that's where all of that comes from. We all experience it. We all experience it. We're right on that threshold of being there all the time.
Yeah.
Some of us have developed, we've exercised those muscles a little bit more than others, and so we can go there we can go there more frequently. We can touch it. We've become, the first time I really went there deeply with Margaret, I came back, I was this blubbering mass of emotion because that love just so overwhelmed me. But then I learned to touch it lightly. You touch it lightly at first until you kind of anesthetize yourself to that love, because it's so much more than the love that we express and feel here in this physical realm. And so our emotions sometimes get overwhelmed by it, when you first start to experience it. But it's something that you can bring into your life. And then once you bring it into your life, like Margaret was able to do, you're able to express it. And when you touch that love, it's like when I talk about my near-death experience, when I'm giving a public talk or something, you can't talk about it without touching it. And when you touch it and you share it, other people feel it. They feel it, and I mean it has. And here again, words don't describe, and I don't want to define something that isn't definable, but there's a sense that people received from listening to an experiencer share their experience in the light and the love and that, that compassion that that they actually get a physical experience from themselves.
Dave, and I think it goes back to what you said earlier, is that the reason that happens is because they sense your authenticity. And for me, there was no turning back after those experiences for me. It was like everything fell off, all of the masks that we talked about last week. And so this process for me personally was about not being, letting go of the thoughts. In other words, not letting your thoughts control you. We were supposed to use our brains as a tool, but we let it use us, because the brain constantly wants to be judging and comparing and analyzing and what does this mean? And when you can come into a consciousness that is thoughtless, which sounds a little strange, but really you just disregard the thought about something, you see things in a different way. So sort of to wrap around my head around some of the things you've been talking about, what really stuck out for me that resonates with me is, for me, number one, authenticity is paramount. I can't be anything else anymore. So that is what draws people, the interest. Well, I want some of that. What are you doing? How does that work? So for me, the authenticity is what leads to peace. I mean, and peace comes from living in the moment. I don't know. There's no other way, no faster way for me to feel completely at peace other than to look at a moment, be right here, and allow it to be, as you said, allow it to be exactly as it is, without arguing with it, without saying it shouldn't be happening. Byron Katie says, if it happens, it's necessary. And I really believe that. So every single moment when something is happening, I know down deep it's necessary. So that's a very tremendously calming thing for me, because I think, okay, there's something beyond my brain thinking this is wrong that's making this right. So, and wrong and right are not the correct words, but you know what I'm talking about. So it's being real and not striving to be good, striving for peace in every situation. Do I want to be correct about something, or do I want to feel peace about it? And so that comes for me, as you said, living a heart-centered life. It comes very easily. All of a sudden you see people and you send them love when they irritate you, because they're going through something, or whatever they're doing is coming from their experience, and you just send them the best you can, and it's a wonderful reciprocating energy that goes when you start talking like that and living like that.
My wife has this system that she does where she develops that feeling of light, of lightness, and then she kind of encapsulates them in these little balls. Okay, and then as she's going through her day, if somebody is, like you said, like the store clerk is being extra grumpy, poof, she'll throw a little ball of love to him,
Right.
and and she just goes through her life. Boop.
It's amazing how that comes back, because you know what?
Yeah.
You see people actually going, whoa, what's that?
What was that? Yeah.
They feel it. They feel it.
Yeah.
It's great.
Well, as I thought would happen, we've eaten up an hour just like that. I mean,
Oh my
it was
gosh.
just gone.
Oh my God, look at that. Wow.
I've got a bazillion questions. We got to have you back, David. There's so many things that you've raised for us. And before I sort of summarize, maybe Sheila, you could make your comments to our audience about what the heck did we talk about today?
Well, I think as we talked about, the main focus of this is living in the moment. And bringing David in was about, how some very powerful experience in your life can transition the way you think about living and perhaps make it easier to live in the moment. I love his talking about being mindful and bringing different reminders into your day to remind yourself to be more mindful, more present. Even if it's something as, one of the things that I started doing years ago, and it was really mainly to stop being so clumsy. If I were taking like a hot pan from the stove to sink, I would say I am one with this pot. And I feel like we are the same thing, and I'm holding it, and I could really feel my hands around this instrument. So that's such a silly little thing, but it's 10 seconds out of your life. You don't really have to plan for it, but you're really there for it. That's all I have to say.
Good way of looking at the hour. And David, what is the message you'd like our audience to think about?
Well, it's interesting. When we first came in on the show, Sheila said something right off the bat, and I wrote it down about life can be effortless. And I think while we were talking today, I think that we talked about focusing on what's really important, and trying to, because the moment that you're in, is what's most important. And carrying that with us, that, and we have these forks in our road that may be traumatic, they may not be traumatic, they may be blissful, but to kind of not judge them, just allow them to be what they are, and move with it, flow with it. I think if we can all learn how to do that, we're going to find more peace in our life. We're going to be a little more heart-centered and a little more peaceful.
And hopefully our audience knows you've got a lot of wisdom to share. How can they find you? I know it's dharmatalks.com is your main website. But you have
on dharmatalks.com. Yeah, you can, from dharmatalks.com, you can find, my Facebook pages, my Twitter feed, my Google Plus, whatever social media venue that you like. I even have a Pinterest. I love throwing stuff up there. But there's also on my website, I've got, I have some excerpts from my books, free excerpts, so you can get a kind of a taste for what's in the books, that sort of thing, and links. Also, there's my services, of being a transformational life coach, or if you need some energetic healing. It really helped me out a lot during my cancer and transition into health, and that's my real joy. That's my real joy. In fact, I'm leaving next week to go to Central New York, where I'll be doing a couple days of healing, and then next weekend I fly to Sedona, where I'll be with Dr. Eben Alexander in a sound therapy retreat at the Margot Retreat Center, and then I'll be back here in Virginia Beach the following week, where we're running an experiencer retreat for people that have had transformative experiences right here in Virginia Beach. It's going to be more of the fun in the sun and take a break from life type of retreat.
So I recommend people jump to your site, and I know there's a place to leave your name and email address so that you can be part of David's community. I certainly love his daily contemplations that are on his Facebook page. So much information. As you can tell, Dave is a very kind soul, willing to help and guide and direct. And today, he's raised a lot of issues. Certainly in my crisis, and I know some of you out there are still in crisis or trying to get through it all, you have some big questions. And, some of the friends have directed you to a variety of support groups, and I think there's other things that you can start to focus on to help you deal with who am I and what is important to me as I come through this crisis. What kind of life will I live? And I know you're all going to get stuck in, well, what's my purpose in life? Everybody jumps over to that one. And I know I can hook Dave in. If all of you can like and share this when we put this post up, or this video on Facebook, share it and like it and say, bring Dave back, because he has some very interesting things to share about identifying life purpose and what he does and has done to figure out, well, what's ahead of him. In fact, part of the way he coped with his cancer treatment program was having been pre-warned that he was going to face cancer. And when it happened, he was able to accept it and deal with it in a totally different way. So there's so much on this topic that we've just barely touched on, and I thank you all for watching us and participating. And as I say, please like us and share it and indicate in the comment section that you'd like David back, and I'm sure we'll twist his arm and bring him back. But there you go. Thank you ever so much for being here, David. I really appreciate it. It was most kind of you to share a few of the important perspectives that you've gained and give us all a role model to deal with as we're trying to live in the moment and deal with finding peace that we have in our life. So everyone, come on back next Thursday, 3 p.m. Dr. Shawnee Fox is there, and we're going to be talking about reclaiming your personal power and trying to explore what do you do when you're in this crisis recovery, and maybe your spiritual leanings have asked you to talk to God, to talk to angels, to talk to wherever you talk to get some extra help so that you can recover and look at yourself in a more holistic fashion. So we're going to carry on this little segment of discussion of living in the moment with Dr. Shawnee Fox. She was such a great guest last season and is willing to come back next week. So please, next Thursday, 3 p.m. Eastern, tune in. Go to findyournewnormal.com/live. Sign up. We'll get you the link get you on the mailing list, and keep you tuned with all the great things that we're doing this season. So again, David, thanks very much. Sheila, it's such a joy to have you with me every week. This is such a great show, and we'll see everybody again very soon. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.